Hello guys, and welcome to my new video, and today we're going to be looking at Season 2 Patch 10.1 Mythic Plus affixes and the big blue post that was released very recently, nerfing a lot of them. Now, there is a caveat to this video because I was going to release a juicer video where it was going to be very negative. It's based on my feedback in terms of testing Mythic Plus, in terms of testing the new affixes. Basically, the whole summary of the video was going to be, why is Blizzard making Season 2 so much more worse than Season 1? And that video was scheduled to be released very soon, but Blizzard did announce this blue post, and there's some really good nerfs and tuning in this blue post. So instead of releasing that kind of video, I'm going to use snippets of those videos because there is good information there, because there's still issues with Mythic Plus in Season 2, especially with some of the new affixes, especially with Incorporeal, maybe with Afflicted as well. So we're using multiple videos here to showcase what is happening in Season 2, what are my thoughts, and what is Blizzard doing in order to nerf or make Mythic Plus more bearable in Season 2. Let's go and look at the blue post. So the first change that Blizzard is announcing, you can see here, they're flipping around the combinations of affixes. Not a huge change here, except for the fact that you will experience the new affixes a lot earlier, 7 and up instead of 14 and up, and then you'll experience the older affixes from 14 and up keys. So the basic idea of these affix changes is that the combinations are getting a lot simpler because you don't have a seasonal affix anymore, and then you're only getting your third affix at 14 and up. So you can see Blizzard is trying to simplify Mythic Plus, but I don't think they're succeeding by simplifying Mythic Plus because of these two affixes here, but we'll talk about that later in the video. You'll notice here, where is Explosive? Explosive is being retired, and now you're getting Volcanic. Volcanic is a no affix. I think a lot of people are going to be really happy about this because Explosive is a big pain in the butt, especially for healers on live servers right now, because they're responsible for dealing with Explosive, pretty much solely responsible in higher end keys. And Blizzard did try to make a bunch of changes to Explosive in PTR servers in terms of only having 2 spawns regardless of the pulse size, and then increasing the HP, and it just didn't work. So they're removing it. Very good idea. I'm really happy about this. Honestly, Volcanic is a no affix, Entangling is a no affix, Storming is a no affix. These are absolutely painful. We'll talk about the power of combinations at the end of the video. Besides that, they're nerfing a bunch of things. You can see here, there's a big list of a lot of changes that they're doing. So right away, you'll notice that Explosive is being retired. Honestly, one of the best things that they decided to do. Incorporeal, this is one of the worst affixes right now in my opinion, and again, I'll talk about this. Incorporeal beings now fade away when combat with non-incorporeal beings has ended. Pretty much a must change. This still doesn't change an affix for me. I still think it's extremely dependent on the group. It requires cooldowns, it requires coordination. It is Kahunis version 2.0. It is still not fun. Entangling, honestly, I did not see nerfs coming for Entangling because it is almost a non-affix, especially if you play a class that can remove these snares, roots, whatever they are. So Entangling snare effect has been reduced to 30%, used to be 50%. Entangling now has a visual indicating the maximum range of wine and things like that. So one of the biggest issues with Entangling is that you weren't aware if you actually had this on you. So they're changing that. I would compare Entangling very similar to Volcanic. So I think these two affixes are going to be no affixes. Very simple. Afflicted soul health no longer scales after Keystone level 20. This was one of the issues because Afflicted souls, the best way to remove this is to dispel. Now, if you don't have a dispel, the only other way to remove this is to heal up the mob. And I could already see that past higher key levels, healer could not heal them up, or it would be very hard to heal them up because the HP was not irrelevant. So now they're making that a lot easier because it doesn't scale past 20. So then we move on to Spiteful, which I know a lot of melee really hate Spiteful. Melee damage has been reduced by 10%. Spiteful shades health and damage no longer scales after Keystone level 20, which probably the biggest advantage of this is that it probably won't one-shot you once you have enough gear and things like that, which means that if it doesn't one-shot you, you can react to it faster because, hey, I got hit, I have to move out. I think this is a huge nerf to Spiteful. And again, there are combinations where you can get Spiteful and Entangling, but I just don't think Entangling is all that difficult, especially depending on which class you're playing. Then Raging. This is a little bit weird change. Raging now grants creatures immunity to crowd control effects for 20 seconds upon reaching 30%. It used to be 50%. So basically, when a mob reaches 30 or below, you cannot use crowd control abilities, which again, if you have classes that can remove Raging, you can deal with it. But I can see moments where this kind of Raging could be pretty spicy. We'll have to see which mobs we're dealing with in the new dungeons. I can't wait to test it out. Now, bolstering, this is an absolute massive nerf. Bolstering no longer increases health of affected creatures. That was one of the biggest issues with bolstering, because if you bolster multiple mobs, the HP increases, the dungeon takes longer, and you're probably going to deplete. Instead, now it only is going to increase the damage, I'm assuming. So bolstering only increases damage, but it doesn't increase the HP, so you can still kind of nuke down the mobs if they do get bolstered, if you can play around the damage increase and things like that. And Sanguine Ichor Puddles now last 12 seconds instead of 20 seconds. These are insane nerfs to a lot of affixes right now, and I think everyone who's reading this, they're rejoicing, they're super happy. I think the whole concept of everything that Blizzard is doing right now is, hey, we're giving you new dungeons in Season 2, we're giving you old dungeons. The affixes are not going to be the main characters in a dungeon. Because when you're testing PTR, especially when I was testing PTR, some of the affixes are so, not engaging, but they take up a lot of your concentration, a lot of your focus, and you're focusing on affixes more than the actual mobs themselves. And I think Blizzard is trying to tone that down, where the dungeons themselves are the main players. You're mainly focusing on the dungeon, and the affixes are there, but these nerfs, they're making it significantly easier to deal with a lot of these affixes. I tried out, just for the memes, to try a combination of Afflicted and Incorporeal, or Afflicted, Incorporeal, and Explosive, just for the memes to see how these affixes would feel. But there's no reason for me to bang on about certain affix combinations that are not going to exist in live servers based on the blue post. Testing them just for the memes was so awful. First of all, I've tested all of the affixes, I've tested all of the reworks, and I'm expecting more changes to happen. But the worst affix by far, in my opinion, was Incorporeal. Now, this affix is, and you'll see, Afflicted is somewhat similar to this, but this affix requires you to use, it is recommended to use long, hard form CC. So we're talking about things like Paralysis, maybe Banish, you can use Shackle Undead. You can basically use any form of CC to get rid of these. And this affix, again, these blue enemies appear, and it is based on how large of a pull you're doing. They're going to stay there for around 20 seconds, and you're forced, in my opinion, to use hard form or long form CC. So use Paralysis on the mob and you don't have to worry about this. They are immune to damage, so you can't really break them easily anymore, because Blizzard did see an issue with that. And you can use, for example, if you don't have any CC available, you can interrupt the cast. They are casting an ability, but if you interrupt it, they're going to recast it straight away. And you can use things like stuns, but if the stun doesn't last long enough, you'll have to go back on the mob again. And if you let the cast go off, there is a huge punishment. Your damage and healing is going to be reduced by 50%. So you might be asking yourself, hey MadSkillz, that's cool. We have to use different talents. We have to pick up these CC abilities that we never had to use. Now the group, or all of the members in the group, will have to use CC in order to deal with this. That's fine. That's all dandy. That's going to make you a better player. But let's be honest, most of the people in lower end Mythic Plus content, even on 14, 15, 16, 20 keys, a lot of the time they don't even know CC exists. A lot of the time some people don't even know Interrupt exists. And on top of that, you are going to deal with a lot of these mobs if you're doing large trash bag pulls. And how do you deal with the trash bag pull? For example, you get 4 of these spawns and you get all of your group members to provide CC on these, again, these mobs, maybe interrupts, maybe stuns, and then you have to deal with the trash pack that you pulled already, which means you're going to have less CC and less interrupts for that trash pack that you're dealing with. And that leads to a domino effect where everything is going to be harder, especially if you're doing large trash pack pulls, because again, Incorporeal is going to scale based on how many mobs you're pulling, and you're going to get more of these Incorporeal mobs. You're going to have to use more CC, and then you're going to have less CC, less interrupts, less everything on the current trash pack you're dealing with. And honestly, this felt way harder than any other affix that I've seen so far. I think it's going to cause a lot of issues. I think in organized content, you can absolutely deal with this. I don't think this is a hard affix. I just think it's annoying. It takes away from the flow of the dungeon. I would compare Incorporeal to Gahoonies or Infested seasonal affix back in the day. One of the worst seasonal affixes they ever created, in my opinion, was Infested, and they're making an altered version of the worst affix that they ever created in terms of Incorporeal. They're making it a little bit better in terms of quality of life, but the core idea exists in terms of annoyance, in terms of, hey, you're so reliant on other people to use cooldowns or CC or hard form CC or interrupts, and I think it's just going to lead to less enjoyment in the group. By far the worst affix that I've seen so far in PTR testing. Now, another affix that is basically Incorporeal in a shorter version is Afflicted. Now, Afflicted is a lot easier to deal with because unlike Incorporeal, where you have to, again, you're promoted to use this long form CC in terms of paralysis and things like that, they have a long cooldown. Now, Afflicted is something that you can use your Dispel on, and it seems to scale on the Dispel you have. For example, I was running as a Priest and I could use my Disease Dispel, and there was a Druid in the group and they could use their Curse Dispel on these mobs. Once you use a Dispel on these mobs, they're going to disappear, or alternatively, you can heal them up, but I feel like that the HP values, especially in hierarchies, makes it somewhat not worthwhile to heal them up because they do have a decent amount of HP. So Dispelling is the main way of getting rid of these mobs. And again, it's not that hard because the Dispel cooldown is way shorter when you compare it to something like Incorporeal in terms of long form CC. I don't think it's a bad affix in terms of, hey, it's going to be so hard to deal with Afflicted. I just think it's extremely annoying because you have to click these mobs. There's no way to do mouse overs, and I don't know whether that's going to be fixed, whether that's going to be addressed, but right now you have to select this mob by clicking on it, and then you have to click your Dispel. Even if your Magic Dispel or Disease Dispel or whatever Dispel you have is on a mouse over, you cannot mouse over it at this given point, which means you're using 2 clicks to get rid of one of these afflicted mobs. From my very early testing, I was not able to really showcase these mobs on my grid 2. I wasn't able to use any of the target macros, any focus macros, and that kind of makes sense because you couldn't really do that with something like Explosive. Now, in live service in Explosive, you can have a mouse over ability for something like Moonfire, and you can just get rid of Explosive with a single mouse over click, which is somewhat efficient when compared to something like the current implementation of Afflicted. And the last new affix introduced was Untangling. Untangling honestly is an S tier affix. It is very easy to deal with. It is nothing compared to other affixes in terms of difficulty, because Untangling, in my opinion, is the new Volcanic. Volcanic has a very similar, or Untangling and Volcanic has a very similar course of action. If you get Volcanic in the live servers, you're going to move away so you don't get knocked up. If you get Untangling, you're also going to move away because you're slowed and you need to break the vine. If you don't break it, you're going to get stunned. Alternatively, you can use a bunch of different abilities. For example, Discipline or Priest in general can use Fade with a specific talent to break this root, snares, whatever it is. And it almost feels like a non-issue. It feels extremely easy when compared to something like Afflicted or Incorporeal. I think there are certain combos that could be annoying in terms of, hey, you might get Spiteful and Untangling at the same time. I still don't feel that is a hard combo. I still feel Untangling is one of the easiest affixes that they introduced. I don't think it's a big deal. I think you can have some really bad overlaps, but if your class is able to break those, you're not going to have a hard time. This was almost a non-affix for me, and I would definitely compare Untangling to Volcanic in terms of difficulty, and almost, it's so easy, it's almost fun. I think there's going to be, again, I get the point. Blizzard wants you to use CC abilities that you never used before. They want you to talent into abilities that you never talented before. And it kind of makes sense. It's going to make you a better player by pressing and using different combination of abilities that you never used. But at the end of the day, I think Mythic Plus and affixes should be more fun than feel like a giant chore. I think Incorporeal is basically Infested 2.0. And I think Infested was one of the worst affixes or season affixes they ever made. And I think Incorporeal is just so bad that it should be deleted. I don't think there's a way to make this interesting or fun. You can do a Mythic Plus dungeon and you can time this with Incorporeal and you can do well and you can use CC, but are you going to have fun from it? At the end of the day, Mythic Plus should be fun and it should not feel like a giant chore. It felt like I was at work when I was dealing with Incorporeal. It felt like I was doing 9 to 5 or something. This was not a relaxing time. I think Afflicted is the second worst affix. I think it's a lot easier than Incorporeal, but I think at the end of the day, because you have to select it and then use your Dispel ability, it takes away from the fluidity of Mythic Plus Dungeon. All of a sudden you can do, like for example, Grievous is removed. And I actually would love Grievous to come back and get rid of Afflicted and Incorporeal. I would take Grievous back any day of the week because at the end of the day, it's something that shows up on your player frames. It shows up in your grid. It shows up on your Voodoo or whatever. And you're like, okay, these guys are getting Grievous. I need to pump heals. It is a healer responsibility. I'd rather take that responsibility than have to deal with 4 other people when dealing with Afflicted and Incorporeal. It takes away from the fluidity of Mythic Plus Dungeon. It takes away from the flow because you have to click them, you have to select them. It's just, it doesn't feel fun in any shape or the form. They're not hard. I'm not saying these are hard affixes. I'm just saying they're not fun. So now for the whole summary of the video, I think one of the biggest issues right now lies at the power of combinations of affixes. You can have things like Afflicted and Spiteful. You can have Incorporeal and Raging. You can have Untangling and again Spiteful. You can have these combinations. One of the biggest issues for me in Mythic Plus, and it might not be an issue for you, let me know. Really, let me know, because there are weeks which are considered to be push weeks, and those push weeks is when players take time off from from work, take time off from their partners and all that, and they're like, hey, I'm gonna spend the whole week pushing because these weeks are really good. I don't think that's good Mythic Plus design. I would like every single week to be a push week. I don't want to have this huge disparity in power between certain affix combinations and other affix combinations. And I think that's probably the biggest issue right now, because if you have Incorporeal and something like Raging or Bolstering, I still think Incorporeal is significantly more difficult to deal with than something like Entangling and Raging. I think Entangling, Volcanic, Storming, I think these are non-affixes that people can really play around and might not even notice. Volcanic is something that you don't even care about most of the times. These two dungeons or these two affixes, you have to care about them, because if you fail these affixes, you're getting huge downside. Incorporeal, if you don't interrupt or don't CC the mob, you're getting minus 50% damage and healing, which means that you're probably going to wipe on the current pack that you pulled. Volcanic, you fail it, you get brought up in the air. That's it. There is a huge disparity right now, so Blizzard can either hugely nerf these two affixes to the levels of Volcanic, which I think is the right way to go, because I think the power levels are way off, or they can buff every other affix, which I think is going to make affixes more annoying and more difficult to play. My opinion, honestly, I'm not against the whole concept of removing every single affix at this point and just letting you play the dungeons. I actually think that's probably even a better idea, but I like where Blizzard is going with this. Reduce the power of affixes so you as a player can focus more on the actual dungeon you're doing. Have you seen how many abilities some of these dungeons have? Imagine having to deal with Afflicted and Incorporeal. That can sometimes be too much, guys. Let me know how you feel about this video. Let me know how you feel about the affix redesign that Blizzard is introducing. Do you like Afflicted? Do you like Incorporeal? Do you think these dungeon affixes are clunky or annoying? Do you think they should be nerfed? I actually might say that Afflicted and Incorporeal could be deleted. Just ship it the way that it is right now, and I think Season 2 will be a fantastic season. Let me know, and I'll see you in my next video.